Frost clung stubbornly to the edges of the small window, the morning light barely seeping into Sarah Mitchell's modest bedroom. The walls, once painted a cheerful yellow, now bore signs of wear, small cracks and faded patches that reflected the struggles of the family who lived there. 8-year-old Sarah lay awake under a pile of worn blankets, shivering slightly as the winter chill seeped through the thin walls. She listened intently to the rhythmic clatter of dishes in the kitchen, her mother's familiar routine a comforting backdrop to the otherwise harsh morning. "Sarah, time to get up. Sweetie," called Linda Mitchell, her voice soft but tired. She appeared in the doorway, already dressed for her shift at the diner. Her blue uniform looked neat and tidy, though the fabric was worn from countless washes. Linda's blonde hair was pulled back into a practical ponytail, but the dark shadows under her eyes told the story of another sleepless night. Sarah poked her head out from the blankets, her breath visible in the frosty air. "Mom, is the heater working today?" Linda hesitated, her brave smile faltering for a split second before she responded. "Not yet, but Mr. Johnson said he'd try to come by this week." She crossed the room, sitting on the edge of Sarah's small bed. "Guess what? I made us some hot chocolate this morning." "Real chocolate?" Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "Real chocolate? But that's so expensive." Linda smiled and tucked a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "Mrs. Henderson left me a big tip yesterday. Sometimes, good things happen when you least expect them." As she spoke, Linda reached for the purple knit beanie sitting on the nightstand. Gently, she placed it on Sarah's head. "This will keep you warm until we get the heater fixed." Sarah touched the soft wool, her small fingers tracing the familiar pattern of stitches. "Grandma's hat," she murmured. Linda nodded, her voice quiet but steady. "It was the last thing she made before," she trailed off, her words heavy with unspoken emotion. "Do you think Grandma can see us from heaven?" Sarah asked, her voice small but full of hope. Linda blinked rapidly, fighting back tears as she gave her daughter a reassuring smile. "Of course, she can. She's watching over us every day." "Baby." Linda stood, straightening her uniform and taking a deep breath. "Now, let's get some breakfast in you before Mrs. Watson picks you up for school." Sarah sat at their wobbly kitchen table, her hands wrapped tightly around the warm mug of hot chocolate, savoring the rare treat. The sweet aroma was comforting, though it couldn't fully mask the chill that hung in the small apartment. Through the thin walls, she heard the familiar sound of her father's wheelchair creaking, followed by a stifled groan of pain. "Dad needs help again," Sarah whispered, setting her mug down and starting to rise. "Finish your breakfast. Honey, I'll take care of it," Linda said gently, hurrying toward the bedroom. From where she sat, Sarah could hear their muffled conversation. "Jim, please let me call Dr. Peters again. We can figure out a payment plan." "Linda, we're already drowning in bills. I'm not adding more debt to your plate. It's not a burden. You're my husband, and I'm supposed to." "Don't." "Not where Sarah can hear," Jim interjected sharply. Sarah focused on her hot chocolate, trying to drown out their voices. Her father's words stung in a way she couldn't fully understand yet. Things hadn't always been like this. Before the accident at the construction site, her dad had been the strongest, happiest person she knew. He used to hoist her onto his shoulders, chase her around the yard, and make everything feel safe. Now, he rarely left their cramped apartment, his days consumed by pain and the weight of what he could no longer do for his family. The blare of a car horn outside cut through her thoughts. "That's Mrs. Watson," Linda called, rushing back into the kitchen. "Quick, Sarah, get your coat on. Don't forget your backpack." Sarah pulled on her threadbare coat, the sleeves now a little too short, and reached for her backpack. She frowned as her fingers traced a small tear forming along one of the straps, another thing they couldn't afford to replace. "Mom," she said hesitantly. "Jenny's mom said there's a big rally today. President Trump is coming to speak. Everyone's talking about it at school." Linda, busy rinsing the mugs, paused. "Yes, I heard about that. The whole town's been buzzing about it for weeks. Could we go?" Sarah asked eagerly. Jenny said her mom's taking her after school. "We could walk there. It's not far from the diner." "Sarah, honey, I don't know. I have my shift, and then I need to clean the Petersons' house." "But Mom, nothing ever happens here," Sarah interrupted, her voice tinged with desperation. "And maybe," she hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper, "maybe he could help Dad. He's rich, right? And he helps people sometimes. I saw it on TV." Linda dried her hands, turning to face her daughter. The hope in Sarah's wide brown eyes was almost too much to bear. Sweetheart, life isn't like TV. Rich people don't just. Another honk from outside broke the moment. We'll talk about it later. Okay, you need to get to school. Sarah nodded slowly, pulling her hat snugly over her ears and grabbing her backpack. But as she climbed into Mrs. Watson's car, her mind was already racing. Maybe there was a way to see the president after all, even if it meant finding her own way there. The crisp winter air stung Sarah Mitchell's cheeks as she stood among the bustling crowd in the town square. At just 8 years old, she'd never seen so many people gathered in one place. Red, white, and blue banners fluttered from lampposts, and the stage ahead gleamed under the pale winter sun, flanked by towering American flags. The energy was electric, yet Sarah couldn't shake the nervous flutter in her chest. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the purple beanie in her hands, a soft, knitted piece of warmth that meant everything to her. The school day had been torture. Sarah couldn't focus on anything her teacher said, her mind spinning with thoughts of the rally just a few blocks away. During recess, her classmates buzzed with excitement. My dad says there'll be a huge crowd, with TV cameras everywhere, Jenny exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. My brother said they're already setting up the stage. Tommy chimed in, bouncing on his toes. Sarah stayed quiet, pulling her beanie snugly over her ears as the cold wind whipped through the playground. She thought about her dad back home, alone in his wheelchair, and her mom tirelessly working her double shifts. She didn't know what she hoped to achieve by going to the rally, but something deep inside her urged her to try. When the final school bell rang, Sarah made a choice. Instead of heading toward the diner where she usually waited for her mom, she turned down the street leading to the town square. Her worn-out sneakers crunched on the icy pavement as she followed the growing stream of people heading to the event. The square was alive with activity. Police officers stood at every corner, and families huddled together against the chill. Vendors called out, selling flags and buttons with bold slogans. Sarah weaved through the forest of legs, murmuring "excuse me" and "sorry" as she squeezed toward the front. No one paid much attention to the small girl in the oversized coat. Everyone was focused on the stage ahead. Finally, she reached the barrier separating the crowd from the cleared pathway. She could see the stage clearly now, with its rows of American flags and important-looking people rushing back and forth. Beside her, an elderly woman glanced down. "Are you here by yourself, dear?" the woman asked, concern in her voice. Sarah hesitated, then pointed toward the diner in the distance. "My mom works there. She knows I'm here," she lied, hoping the woman wouldn't press further. Before the woman could respond, the crowd erupted in cheers. Black SUVs had pulled up, and Secret Service agents appeared, scanning the sea of people with sharp, practiced eyes. Then, the opening notes of "God Bless the USA" blasted from the speakers, and the crowd roared. Sarah stood on tiptoes, craning her neck to see. There he was, President Trump, larger than life, waving to the audience with a confident smile. He spoke about jobs, about hope, about making things better for families. Sarah thought about her own family, her dad's pain, her mom's exhaustion, the broken heater that turned their apartment into an icebox. Her fingers tightened around the beanie. Her grandmother had always told her that the smallest gestures could carry the greatest love. Maybe this little hat, her most cherished possession, could mean something to someone else too. As Trump descended the stage and began greeting people along the pathway, Sarah's heart pounded. The Secret Service agents were clearing a path, their faces impassive. She clutched the beanie tighter, summoning all her courage. "Mr. Trump," she called, her small voice almost drowned out by the noise. "Sir, I have something for you." At first, she thought he hadn't heard her. The crowd was too loud, and she was just a tiny voice among hundreds. But then, his eyes met hers. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. The agents hesitated, glancing at each other, unsure of how to handle the situation. But Trump raised a hand, signaling them to hold back. He approached Sarah, kneeling slightly to meet her gaze. "Hi there, sweetheart," he said, his tone softer than she'd expected. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Sarah Mitchell." He glanced at the beanie she was holding out. "And you want to give me this?" She nodded. "My grandma made it," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "She died a few months ago. She said it would keep love close to my thoughts. But I think you need it more than me." Trump's expression shifted, his face softening as he carefully took the beanie from her hands. He turned it over, examining the delicate stitches as though it were the most precious thing he'd ever held. "Your grandmother must have been a special lady," he said quietly. "She was," Sarah replied, tears welling in her eyes. "She said love always finds a way back to you, even when you give it away." The crowd had fallen silent, the murmurs replaced by the clicks of cameras capturing the tender moment. Even the most hardened onlookers couldn't hide their emotion. Trump straightened, holding the beanie aloft for everyone to see. "This young lady has reminded me of something important," he said, his voice ringing out over the crowd. "Sometimes, the smallest gestures carry the biggest love." He looked back down at Sarah. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, his tone warm. "I'd like to make you a trade. This beanie means the world to you, and I promise to treasure it. But I want to give you something too, something that can help your family." Sarah's breath hitched as he gestured to an aide nearby. She couldn't have known it then, but this simple act of bravery, this small gift from her heart, would change everything for her family and leave an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. Sarah stood rooted in place, clutching the purple beanie in her hands, the crowd's cheers and claps washing over her like waves. She barely noticed the cold now. Her head swirled with everything that had just happened. Had she really spoken to the President of the United States? Had he really promised to help her family? Around her, the townspeople were buzzing with excitement. A woman in a red scarf leaned over and whispered to her husband, "That little girl just got the president's attention. Can you believe it?" "Linda Mitchell's kid," the man murmured back, nodding with a knowing look. "That family's been through hell. If anyone deserves a break, it's them." Sarah wanted to shrink into her coat, embarrassed by all the attention, but part of her couldn't help feeling a spark of pride. Her mom always told her to stay humble, but today she had taken a leap, and maybe, just maybe, it had worked. As the crowd began to thin, a reporter with a microphone and a cameraman approached. The reporter, a young woman in a sharp navy coat, knelt slightly to be at eye level with Sarah. "Hi there," she said with a warm smile, her voice soft yet professional. "My name's Kate. I'm with Channel 6 News. Would you mind if I ask you a few questions?" Sarah hesitated, looking around. She didn't see her mom anywhere. What would she think if Sarah was on the news? But before she could decide, Kate gently prompted her again. "It's okay if you're nervous. I just think a lot of people would love to hear your story. You were so brave back there." The word brave again. Sarah wasn't sure she believed it, but she nodded anyway. "Okay," she said softly. Kate's eyes lit up. "Great. So, Sarah, can you tell me why you decided to give the president your grandmother's beanie?" Sarah swallowed, glancing at the purple wool in her hands. It's special," she began, her voice shaky at first. "My grandma made it for me before she passed away. She said it was full of love and courage. And I thought, maybe he needed some courage too." The reporter smiled kindly, her pen moving quickly across her notepad. "That's such a beautiful thought. And your dad? He's the one who had an accident? Can you tell us a little more about that?" Sarah bit her lip, unsure how much to say. "He was a construction worker," she said finally. "But there was an accident with some scaffolding. And now he uses a wheelchair. My mom works a lot to take care of us. But it's hard. Really hard." Kate nodded, her expression serious. "It sounds like your family has been through so much. What do you hope will happen now?" Sarah looked down at her boots, scuffed and slightly too tight. "I just hope my dad gets better," she said quietly, "and that my mom doesn't have to work so hard all the time. I just want us to be okay again." Kate placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Thank you, Sarah. You're an inspiration." She stood and turned to the camera, launching into her segment. This small-town moment may go down in history. A brave little girl, a heartfelt gesture, and a president's promise, proof that sometimes the most extraordinary stories come from the most ordinary places. Sarah's cheeks burned again, and she ducked her head, hoping the cameraman would move on soon. "Hey, kid." Sarah turned at the sound of a deep voice. It was one of the Secret Service agents, Agent Bob, the one who had touched the beanie earlier. He looked a little awkward, standing there with his hands clasped in front of him, but his expression was kind. "You did good out there," he said, his gruff tone softer now. "I've been doing this job for years, and I've never seen the boss stop like that for anyone. You made an impression." Sarah blinked up at him. "Really?" Bob nodded, then hesitated before adding, "And for what it's worth, I think your grandma would have been real proud." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes, but she blinked them away quickly, giving him a small, shy smile. "Thank you," she whispered. Linda Mitchell rushed forward, her apron still dusted with flour and her hair hastily pinned back. She knelt, grabbing Sarah's shoulders and pulling her into a tight hug. "What on earth is going on? Are you okay? What have you?" Her words faltered as she caught sight of the check clutched in Sarah's trembling hands. Her eyes widened, darting from the paper to the red campaign cap in her daughter's other hand. Then, she looked up, her gaze landing on Donald Trump. "Mrs. Mitchell," Trump said, tipping the purple beanie slightly in greeting. "You have a remarkable daughter." Linda blinked, trying to process the scene. The President of the United States standing in front of her wearing a handmade purple beanie. The crowd of townspeople buzzing with excitement. Reporters snapping pictures. And Sarah holding a check with more zeros than she'd ever seen in her life. "Wait," she stammered. What is this?" Sarah beamed, her face glowing with excitement. "Mom, I told him about Dad and how hard you work in." She thrust the check forward, her voice rising with emotion. "He's going to help us. For Dad's surgery. For the bills. For everything." Linda's hands shook as she took the check. Her breath hitched audibly when she saw the amount. $50,000, she whispered, her voice cracking. Trump stepped closer, his voice calm and steady. "Your daughter gave me something today that can't be measured in money, hope, courage, and a reminder of what's important. It's only fair I return the favor." He gestured toward the check. "That's for your family, for your husband's medical care, for a working heater, and to give you a little breathing room. You deserve it." Linda stared at the president, her hand trembling as she gripped Sarah's. "I don't even know how to thank you, Mr. President." Trump waved her words away, his expression softening. "You don't need to thank me, Mrs. Mitchell. Thank your daughter, and maybe her grandmother too. I think they had this all planned out." He glanced at Sarah, who beamed proudly, holding her campaign cap like a treasure. Joe, the diner owner, stepped closer, nervously twisting his apron in his hands. "Mr. President," he ventured, "I don't mean to intrude, but I've been in this town a long time, and I've never seen anything like this. You've given us all something to talk about for the rest of our lives." Trump chuckled, adjusting the purple beanie perched on his head. "Well, Joe, I think sometimes it's good to shake things up a bit, and if that means wearing a purple beanie and visiting a diner, then so be it." The crowd outside was growing larger by the minute, pressing against the frosty windows to catch a glimpse of the president sitting in a small-town booth. The hum of conversation and the occasional flash of cameras gave the moment a surreal quality. Linda's voice broke through the noise, quiet but steady. "Mr. President, I hope you know what this means to us. My husband, he's been trying so hard to stay positive, but it's been tough. And Sarah, she's been so brave. This is more than I ever dreamed could happen." Trump leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Let me tell you something, Mrs. Mitchell. Your daughter reminded me of something I think a lot of us forget. What it means to give, even when you don't have much. She taught me a lesson today, and I intend to pay it forward. Your family deserves this chance." Sarah's face lit up. "Does that mean Dad's going to walk again?" Trump smiled at her, his voice gentle. "I can't make promises, Sarah, but I can promise you this. We'll do everything in our power to give your dad the best chance." He reached up and touched the purple beanie, as if drawing strength from it. "I've made some calls. Dr. Harrison at the Mayo Clinic owes me a favor. He's the best spine specialist in the country." Sarah's eyes widened with hope. "Is he going to fix Dad?" Trump nodded. "He's going to try, sweetheart. And you know what?" He tapped the beanie lightly. "I think he's going to have some extra help from up above." One of his advisors approached the table, holding a tablet. "Sir, Dr. Harrison is on the line. He can see Mr. Mitchell next week." "If—" Trump interrupted, his voice firm. "Tomorrow. Tell him tomorrow. I'll handle the arrangements personally." The advisor nodded, hurrying away to make it happen. Linda pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed. "Tomorrow? How is this even real?" Joe stepped in again, his voice a mix of awe and gratitude. "Mr. President, you've done something today that nobody here will ever forget." Trump rose from the booth, giving Linda and Sarah a warm smile. "Sometimes, Joe, all it takes is one brave little girl to remind us what really matters." As he left the diner, the purple beanie still on his head, the crowd outside erupted into cheers. Cameras flashed, and reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Inside, Linda held Sarah close, her tears a mix of relief and joy. "Grandma was right," Linda whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Love really does find its way back." Sarah smiled up at her mother, her heart full. I think it's just getting started, Mom.